Hi there, I'm Jing again with the Bali Business Review. In addition to the price war that's been happening in Bali, there is now an actual real war. And appropriately enough, I happen to be in Magelang in Central Java today, which is the home of the Indonesian Military Academy. And it's actually also the home of a very, very special military museum celebrating the military history of Indonesia. I think in this episode of the Bali Business Review, we're going to go into a deep dive about the consequences of how international conflict in the form of war affects property rentals and therefore also property valuations in Bali. If you want to know how this particular aspect of understanding conflict and war is going to affect your property investment, stick around for this episode as we go into a deep dive about how current warfare affects the future of the Bali real estate market. I'm next to a helicopter here in Magelang, which is the home of the Indonesian Military Academy. The Military Academy here in Magelang has had notable alumni and also coordinating ministers such as the current president, Prabowo, the past president, SBY, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, and also perhaps one of the most powerful men in Indonesian politics, Pak Luhut, who is the coordinating minister of Maritime Affairs. Here at Bukit Vista, we've already begun to see the early effects of changes in guest plans due to cancellations happening as we speak, as travelers who are coming from Western Europe have had their vacation plans maybe adjusted due to missiles flying over the Persian Gulf. So one of the things to keep in mind about this recent US-Iran-Israel conflict is that it's not the first time that Bali's been through, let's say, some of the adverse effects of having a global conflict emerge over flight routes affecting the particular, what would I call it, access for visitors from Western Europe to reach Indonesia and in particularly Bali. Last 2 years, we've had and seen holes over conflict zones over the Ukraine area. But as we discovered previously last year on the Bali Business Review, airline networks are incredibly robust and they're able to route airspace by finding access routes and ways around them. But trying to understand further what are the implications of how warfare in the Middle East will affect the long-term valuation of properties in Bali, we need to study this a little bit more. So let's go over to a computer, find a quiet space, and understand what is the consequence of conflicts that are happening in the Middle East in relation to how travel and also property prices might be affected in Bali.
Yo, Bukit Vista fam, check the stats, that's the word. Accuracy jumping, cleanliness ain't absurd. Communication.
There are over 11,000 flights that have been canceled in the region as closures of major airports such as those in Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai are taking place. Thankfully, if you go on Google Flights or any other large-scale aggregator of flight tickets, you'll still find available flights coming from Western Europe to Bali available to purchase. Sometimes with even transit points in those airports that I mentioned are closed. How is this possible, you might ask? How is it possible that the flights coming from Europe are still available and still possible despite a hot war and hot conflict happening along the route and air corridors between Europe and the destination in Bali? Well, it's all possible because of the incredible strength of the international flight network. So the flight network across the world has nodes and you could say packets. It works very much similar to the way the internet is designed. You take out a particular node and the traffic will then simply fall to another node and continue on as is. This is the way that flight route networks are designed in order to be able to overcome interruptions along certain areas. This system has been working quite effectively if you take a look at the data visualization here brought to you by this flight tracking map. If you pay attention to the area across the Persian Gulf, around the GCC, over Iran, you'll see that what's happening now is that a hole is forming around the flight paths going over this region. Airplanes are simply averting pathways that cross over Israel, Syria, Iraq, and of course Iran and the Persian Gulf. This should come as no surprise to anybody who has remembered that during this escalation of a new war in the Persian Gulf, there's been an ongoing war for the past few years in the Ukraine and Russia area. Similarly, in that area, you can see that flight paths also diverge over the conflict region in order to create safety and reduce the risk of a catastrophic missile strike on a commercial airliner. Now, that we see the strength of the flight network and we see the ability for, say, motivated travelers to still make their way from destinations in Western Europe, the Middle East, and Africa to Bali, we know that this does not mean that there's a physical hard stop on tourism coming from these major inbound marketplaces. But simply put, this music might be just slowing down over time. So in what ways would we expect, say, an ongoing conflict to affect the future of how arrivals might shape out to the rest of 2026? Well, there's probably going to be increases in energy prices as an ongoing conflict in one of the largest energy markets in the world is going to probably raise prices for transportation. And yes, this includes the price of plane tickets, not just coming from Western Europe or the Middle East, but from all over the world. As plane tickets rise, you can also expect corresponding demand from all segments of the world to also diminish, as some travelers are probably not going to want to pay for a more expensive ticket to arrive to Bali. That being said, even for the more motivated travelers that are willing to pay more for a higher priced plane ticket, what this might mean is also a lower disposable income for things like accommodations and experiences once they do arrive to Bali as well. This is basically not such good news. It's a pressure for decreasing prices again across the board on multiple categories of accommodations and experiences and such. Another long-term problem comes with the face of uncertainty and the increased risk of cancellations on all established bookings and also future bookings. As long as there's conflict that's fresh in the minds of every potential traveler that might have to cross over this region in their attempt to come to Bali, there will be less appetite to make future plans to come to Bali. That means a compression of booking window. Booking window is the lead time between the time somebody decides to travel and the time they actually arrive. So generally speaking, what's good for occupancy, what's good for the economy is to have longer booking windows. That means more travelers are making more future decisions to arrive to Bali, thus creating less of a panicky last-minute discount situation that then forces a large segment of available inventory in the marketplace to make last-minute rapid discounts due to growing pains of unsold inventory. Yes, this does mean that prices are probably going to fall and fall faster. Hotels, villas, and smart managers are going to see that their future dates remain yet unsold and unoccupied that is different from past years. So a compression of booking window is also going to lead to more last-minute discounts and have less certainty over how much, say, predictable revenue is going to occur. Now, the war is still very, let's say, fresh in terms of its initial beginnings, and so the long-term consequences at this point are a little bit beyond my immediate ability to forecast, but we will be looking at this in the context of also other news, such as the potential reduction of supply through the new NIB requirement for all hosts to have in order to continue listing online platforms. We'll continue looking at the arrival of new supply through, say, construction site mapping, through our drone and aerial updates on our shorts here on YouTube. And we'll also be looking at the, let's say, competitive ranking of different areas through their accumulation of 5-star reviews, and which regions are likely to do better than other regions, and which particular properties are also likely to do better than other properties. My long-term message to the concerned and also motivated investors in Bali is such: every obstacle that makes it difficult for any business to survive is another blessing in disguise that reduces competition. So yes, this is another example of how in 2026, we're suffering through a lot more short-term pain, But those that are already deciding to leave the market by choosing to sell their property or going into strategies of hoping for a long-term rental are aiding to the benefit of those who are in the short-term marketplace, competing and hopefully gaining higher rankings and future profitability through long-term decisions that improve overall ability for their properties to compete in a very competitive marketplace. This is Jing again with the Bali Business Review, and if you do enjoy what you see, please like, comment, subscribe below, as we will faithfully produce content that is informative. All right, see you in the next episode.
Yo, Bucket Vista fam, check the stats, that's the word. Accuracy jumping, cleanliness ain't absurd. Communication popping, locations on the rise. Bucket Vista giving 5-star paradise. We going up, 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 we on the rise. 5-star service, you can see it in their eyes. We going up, 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 reaching new heights. Bucket Vista shining bright and guest delights. We going up, 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 we on the rise. Bucket Vista shining bright and guest delights.